The Edible Woman was Atwood's first published novel, but it was Surfacing that really started to put her on the literary map. The Canadian literary map, that is. It deals not only in Atwood's bread and butter theme, which is gender dynamics and power, but also introduces the environmentalism theme that will come to have such a prominent streak in her Mad Adam trilogy 30 years later. My name's Eddie, we're going through Atwood's novels. Hop on, losers! Surfacing is the story of an unnamed narrator heading back to her unnamed hometown in northern Quebec. She's heading there with two of her recently made friends, Anna and her husband David, as well as her boyfriend Joe. Not Anna's boyfriend Joe, that would be an interesting trip. This is a place that she hasn't been back to for a long time. When she tries to guide the group, she takes them to an old road that no longer exists. She's making the trip to search for her father, who disappeared some time ago, and this is her first time coming back since then. Immediately it's clear that despite growing up here, the surfacer, which is what a lot of critics refer to the main character as, always has felt like an outsider in this town. Her French, required in North Quebec, is rusty and awkward in her mouth. Everyone in the town's also familiar with her father's disappearance. And eventually the trip go to the island on which they lived, a place with limited electricity and that's cut off from the mainland. It has an outhouse some distance from the house to kind of show you what kind of a place it is. It's worth saying that her mother died from a brain tumour some time ago, which kind of furthers her disconnection from this place. In the wilderness, she has time to reflect on a number of different things. Joe and David are kind of film bros. They've brought a camera along to kind of record the experience of being, out in the wilderness, out in the wild. The surfacer and Joe have somewhat of a strained relationship. They're living together, but she hasn't yet told him that she loves him. Her previous marriage ended sometime before the novel, and that was kind of a source of tension between her and her parents. When she asks Anna how her and David seem to make it work as a couple, Anna kind of says, you just have to pick someone and stick with it, David, however, is an arsehole. He is a bully and he belittles his wife constantly. The surfacer is disappointed not to find anything that immediately helps her find her father. An exploration of the island does not immediately produce results. Meanwhile, a pair of Americans have been hunting and fishing in the nearby area. Our narrator is disgusted by their destructive and ostentatious presence, and is kind of weary of this growing Americanization of more Americans coming up to the north. As the novel goes on, it becomes clear that the surfacer is losing her grip on conventional reality. She starts feeling her father as kind of a presence rather than a flesh and blood person, kind of as a threat. She also realizes her relationship with Joe is not at all working. She says, when you can't tell the difference between your pleasure and pain, then you're an addict. When she takes them all on a blueberry foraging trip to kind of ameliorate their boredom, Joe proposes to her rather suddenly. She does not react well, saying, why are you doing this to me? You'll ruin it. Eventually, when she's unable to tell him but she loves him, they end it. She finds in her father's documents that he's been tracking down and making copies of cave paintings that he's found in the local area, which he's been making copies of and then sending off for academic research purposes. Finally, a good lead. Based on his research, she's able to find a point on a map which she thinks is a place where he found one of these cave paintings. They go to search for it. At one point, she finds a dead heron that has been killed by the Americans completely pointlessly and kind of hung up for the world to see. David and Joe inevitably film the dead bird. In the cave, she's unable to find the paintings, either having used the map wrong or just been a bit confused. On the way back, they run into the Americans who turn out to actually be Canadians. They're just Mets fans. The narrator says it doesn't matter either way. If you talk like Americans, if you act like Americans, if you think like Americans, you might as well be Americans. A language is everything you do, she narrates. On the last day before someone's coming to pick them up from the island, she kind of longs to find the closest ex that had been left by her father. Meanwhile, David forces Anna to strip, insisting that they need a naked woman for their film. She's not on board, but David makes her do it, and Joe films the whole thing with her jumping into the lake. The narrator goes to the nearby cliff hoping to find the ex, and she dives down but is unable to find anything at first. Instead of a painting, she eventually sees a shadow coming up towards her with open eyes. She's terrified, and her first thought is, this is my brother who nearly drowned when he was younger and we lived there. Instead, she realizes it's the child that she abandoned, or as we now realize, an abortion that she was forced to have by her much older partner when she was younger. This older partner was also a married teacher of hers. From this moment, her attachment to the world slips even further as she surfaces. Both Joe and David try to get it on with her after this point, and she rebuffs them separately. A boat arrives with men saying that they've discovered her father's body. She doesn't believe it, thinking, oh, they're so clever to have guessed that the body was found with his missing camera. She hadn't told anyone that his camera was missing. Rather than mourning, she says she's finally come alive. She refuses to go back to the city with the others, instead destroying the film that they've made by chucking it into the lake, stripping off all her clothes and going to be one with nature. My body also changes, she says. The creature in me, plant, animal, sends out filaments in me. I ferry it secure between life and death. I multiply. She burns everything in the house. Her wedding ring, her scrapbook, she's an artist, the cave paintings, a single page of every book in the house, and she heads off into the wilderness alone. She brings a blanket, saying that she'll need it until her fur grows in. Eventually she encounters a shadowy figure again, the thing she says that her father encountered when he was out here for too long alone. People come and try and find her, but she refuses to go back with them. Eventually, afterwards, she sees herself in the mirror and kind of sees the person that she's become and decides that she doesn't want to be a victim anymore. When Joe comes to search for her one final time, she decides that she will go with him. But Joe isn't an American because he's only half formed as a person. And for that reason, she can trust him and go on with him. Cool. There's a lot to unpack here to kind of bring to the surface, if you will. You won't? Yeah, no, that's reasonable. When I was doing my research into this novel, the thing that came up again and again is how kind of in-depth the scholarship on this novel is. Far more in-depth than can be discussed in the parameters of a YouTube video without making it ridiculous. Broadly, these themes can be summed up as environmentalism / ecofeminism, as gender and power dynamics, as a Canadian nationalism, and also just kind of general aesthetic weirdness. Take the first line of the novel. I can't believe I'm on this road again, twisting along past a lake where the white birches are dying. The disease is spreading up from the south, and I notice they have seaplanes for hire. Immediately, this is very evocative. We get the narrator's reminiscence of her past life here. We get the environmentalism image shining through, and we get the idea of a growing tourist presence. I also feel like the idea of a dying white birch is just a very powerful image in my mind. Throughout this novel, this reflection on nature and man's relationship with nature is one of the key themes. Firstly, in a straightforward way, the surfacer is just unhappy with how man has been treating nature. This is represented in her kind of visceral reaction to Joe and David when they start filming some fish guts. She is disgusted and horrified. She's released frogs that her brother was collecting but really kind of imprisoning in a horrid way when they were younger. She has despair out the way that the heron is treated by the non-Americans, and the thing she kind of comes back to is the innocence of the heron. It's notable that in all of these occasions, this kind of dread that she has about nature is linked with male power and domination. This feeds into an argument presented by scholars such as Bhalla as ecofeminism. The idea that the oppression of women ties in or has direct parallels with the oppression of nature. Take Anna's character, for example. When she's forced to strip, she's stripped of her humanity and is treated in exactly the same way that they treated the fish guts and the heron. Bhalla argues that it is by coming to terms with her relationship with nature and this ecofeminist point of view that the narrator is able to come back and heal and take power over her own life. Gender and identity is also a strong theme throughout the novel. Anna is trapped in a marriage that's so awful and patriarchal, but when she forgets her makeup, she kind of knows that David is going to punish her for it, even if it's in a subtle way later on. David has frequent affairs, but kind of deflects it back onto Anna, saying that, oh, you know, she secretly likes it, that she's just jealous of the situation. And also the narrator is forced to have an abortion by a man who kind of sees it as no worse than removing a wart from his body, which is an opinion that she clearly does not share given her deep-seated trauma throughout the novel. Most obvious of all is, you know, the point that I've been calling her the surfacer this whole time, because we don't know the name of the main character of this novel. She's nameless even within her own narrative. This also allows the reader to understand her synthesis with nature much more plainly. She never had a full identity in the first place. The fact that her decision to go with Joe in the end is based on her just thinking that he's like not a fully formed human, just not even a full man, that he's a loser, is kind of indicative of the ways that Atwood presents women as taking power back over her own life during this period. It's between a Joe and a David, and the narrator knows which one she would pick. Nationalism is another key theme in the novel, particularly a reflection on Canada's history. Throughout the novel, the surfacer is kind of worried about Americanization, about the relationship with America and Canada. This seems to kind of stand in for a mixture of neocolonialism, of the destruction of nature, of kind of touristification of the area, of cultural eradication. She finds significance in one of the townspeople replacing their wooden range with a stove, and also kind of ties in this Americanization with overfishing, with trees being lobbed down. At one point, the Americans literally blow up the fish in the water, and like, first of all, what? Huh? What are you doing? But second of all, this is the exemplification of this loudness, this presence that they have in her life. The fact that these Americans are Canadians only further proves her point of this eradication of culture. Bill Malmstrom is another example of this, a guy who's kind of, you know, waiting with his eye on her father's property, ready to snatch it up as soon as it's available. It's interesting because this kind of projection of Canada's history onto Americans and putting the problems squarely with them is kind of part and parcel of a deflection that these characters have throughout the novel about Canada's own history. She also kind of deflected it onto Germans when she was growing up following World War II. The line in the novel, "This country is founded on the bodies of dead animals. The beaver is to this country what the black man is to the United States," is outwardly ludicrous. Like, beavers, I'm sure, have had a rough time of it, but they should not necessarily be the focal point of a discussion of Canada's colonial history. The fact that her father even dies looking for cave paintings kind of shows the things that this novel is covering up, or at least the characters in this novel are kind of covering up in their discussions on Canadian past, and the failure to come to terms with Canadian nationalism. A brief note finally on the kind of aesthetics and weirdness of the later part of the novel. It's a pretty trippy experience reading it. The surfacers note that from any rational point of view she's absurd, but that there are no rational points of view anymore is an interesting one. It suggests a full rejection of the laws of the society that she lives in, a total dissociative breakdown. And this manifests itself in some pretty stunning imagery in the latter part of the novel. Phrases like, "I am not an animal or tree," "I am the thing in which the trees and animals move and grow," "I am a place." Related connection with nature, yes, but also a new alien perspective on life. Lines like "blue bottle fly near my elbow, metallic abdomen gleaming, sucker tongue walking on the oilcloth like a seventh foot." Breath suggests that phrases like this show the narrator has kind of tapped into a pre-rational, pre-linguistic state. Atwood effectively lets us feel what this narrator is feeling. This imagery kind of makes sense to the reader in some senses. It taps into our sensory experiences in such a strange way. The shadowy figure that both is and isn't her father, the way that she connects to the world in the latter part of the book. I think it would take months of study to kind of get into the depth of all the layers that this novel has left to unfurl. This is a beguiling, enjoyable early novel by Atwood, one that you feel viscerally, but not one that I'm necessarily sold on the ending of, like many critics. Thank you for joining me in this discussion. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, whether you kind of felt as tapped into the novel in the latter parts as I did, whether you were as confused as I was. Yeah, feel free to subscribe, stick around. We're going through Atwood's novels. We've already done a series on Ishiguro on this channel, which you can check out. Got a little playlist for that. And thanks for hanging out. Yeah, see you next time.